of us actually look quite different. Yet we wouldn't doubt for a minute that we're all members of the same species. We're human. Why is this? This is because we actually share a common past, a history which distinguishes us from our closest relatives, the chimpanzees. And the story of this history, my history, your history, how we're related to each other, our common past, is written in our DNA. So I study these stories, I read DNA. If you walk around at dusk, you'll have company short-nosed fruit bats. They feed during the night, and so they sleep during the day. Males of species go to a lot of trouble to make homes or tents where they are joined by females. And it even seems like they tend to protect the females that cohabit with them. For a long time, scientists assumed that clearly this was a family unit. Clearly, the males were fathering the offspring of the females who lived with them. Used data from 5 years, DNA and paternity analysis, to show that this was not the case. And actually, females chose to mate with other males. And clearly, being the homemaker didn't entitle a male to success. So the point of my story is this. If you look around you, you'll see wonderful phenomena, beautiful things, and you might ask questions of these phenomena. You make assumptions about them, but we use an invisible source of information, DNA, to ask these questions, and sometimes we find very unexpected answers which potentially lead to more questions. Like the questions that faced my friend and colleague, Anindya Sinha, when in 2005, he saw this beautiful monkey high up in the mountains in Arunachal Pradesh. Now, this monkey, like close by neighbor, the Assamese macaque, it looked a lot more like the Tibetan macaque, but this guy lives all the way far off in China. We tried to investigate this using DNA, and we found that this monkey was related neither to the Tibetan nor the Assamese macaque, but to the much further away southern bonnet macaque. This showed us that our knowledge of diversity in the Northeast, for example, a remote location, is actually really poor. As we continue to investigate these monkeys, we find that being in this mountainous landscape of Arunachal Pradesh potentially isolates populations, making them quite different from each other. Now, how do we actually get this information? How do we get DNA? Just before I started my job at the NCBS in Bangalore, I saw a study on global genetic variation in tigers, and this study had pretty curious results. It suggested that Indian tigers don't actually have a lot of genetic variation to speak of. Now, this was a little surprising, given that 60% of the world's tigers actually live in the Indian subcontinent. The problem with this study was its sampling was limited because it focused on blood as a source of tiger DNA. So we decided to do things a little bit differently. We walked through forests across the Indian subcontinent with help from collaborators Ullas Karant and others, and we tried to use unused source of DNA so far, tiger feces or poop. The thought that you can get DNA from a tiger without even seeing it by just walking through the forest and collecting its feces is almost unimaginable, and it was really exciting. We got a treasure trove of information from this DNA. We were able to, for example, show that Indian tigers actually retain 60 to 70% of the species variation, making India a stronghold for tiger conservation in the future. We were able to count tigers in a forest, figure out how many individuals lived in a particular forest, figure out relationships between them, make landscapes of variation for tigers, which we could use then to work with the police, for example, and identify geographic origins for confiscated skin. So this picture shows you a skin where we've actually extracted DNA, and we've been able to potentially suggest where this tiger was poached from. We were also able to go back in time. So using DNA from 200-year-old tigers from the London Museum of Natural History, we were able to look at what tiger variation was like in the past. And our results showed that tigers today have become more disconnected, less together than they were in the past. And this was worrying. So we asked, are tigers still moving around today? Are they able to get from one park to the other? When we looked at this, we found that we still see through genetics hints that tigers are dispersing up to distances of 500 kilometers between parks even today. While all this is very fascinating, how relevant is it? Well, this picture shows night lights, and it basically shows urbanization. Our earlier studies suggested that while tigers are able to move, they are impacted by the landscapes through which they disperse. So urban settlements and roads are not good for tiger dispersal. How then will tigers disperse through these landscapes? How will they be connected between their populations? So I hope that our science and our investigations will help answer some of these questions about the future of the tiger and maybe guide policy and management. But the tiger is only one species that lives in the Indian subcontinent, and our experience with the munzala, the monkey from Arunachal, made us curious about the other species that live here. And so what we did was we generated a map of biodiversity for mammals across the Indian subcontinent. And you can see here that basically, so red is high diversity, or many species. Two things, actually. One, the Northeast is kind of blazing with diversity, this comet of diversity shooting through the Himalayas. And the two, the rest of India seems pretty dead, not much happening in terms of diversity. Why is this? Is this again something to do with India's past? India has a really interesting geological past, and you can see there this movie where India breaks off from Madagascar, Africa, sails through the ocean on the longest journey of any landmass to bang against Asia, creating the Himalayas. While this was happening, there's a lot of interesting things happening biologically. Dinosaurs went extinct, and mammals radiated across the world. So it's the fact that we have not very high biodiversity in India for mammals, because what we have is simply what has trickled in from the sides after India arrived at Asia. So these are some of the questions we're trying to investigate now with genetics. We're trying to understand the creation, the assembly of India's biodiversity. And again, the reason this is relevant, I think, is because the heart of our diversity, the Northeast, is under threat. And a picture of a boy whom we encountered while doing fieldwork. There is a lot of hunting in these areas. This picture shows you a bat harvest, which happened just a few weeks ago in Nagaland. On the right are basically dead bats. And it's not just hunting. There's a lot of other land use change and development. This is a big dam being built on the river Teesta in Sikkim, definitely going to affect biodiversity. And given that we don't know anything about this biodiversity, I think it's important that we understand what we're losing before we actually lose it. And just leave you with this idea or vision of mine. I believe that understanding the past through DNA, this invisible medium, will give us some insight on potentially how we can move towards the future and maybe save a part of it. Thank you.